All right, we'll give everybody a second to log in and then we'll get started. Let's see if our actual chat works as well. We can try that out. So let's see if folks can say hello in the chat, and then we'll see what's going on here. So yeah, we are able to see a couple of you guys. Hello, everyone. Yeah, if you don't mind saying hello in the chat, and we can see who's in the room. And hopefully that works, at least in theory. And we're gonna get going in a second here. I will say hello as well. Oh, good morning. Hi, George. Nice to see you, or kind of virtually see you. George is a privacy expert that used to work at Government of Alberta and has been helping us a lot on some of our privacy and security work. So nice to see you. Yeah, if anybody else is in the room, Carolyn Stewart, Carolyn from Feed Ontario. Hi, Carolyn. Tanya. Hi, Tanya. What organization are you with? I'm sorry if I should know that already. Okay. Steve from BC Housing. Hey, Steve. Nice to meet you. And Neil Atkinson, YWCA Banff. Hello. Tanya says District of Muskoka. Awesome. I haven't made it out there before, but I hear it's just gorgeous. So that's awesome. Okay. So, Leah, I'll say a couple more shout outs as people come in. Transition House of Nova Scotia. Awesome. Nice to meet you. And Leah, I'm guessing that's domestic violence type of support. And Destiny from Hamilton. Leah says yes. Destiny, what organization are you from? If you wouldn't mind. Noreen from Cups, Calgary. Awesome. I love Cups. It's really close. CHIL. Awesome. Thanks, Destiny. Yeah, folks, just keep dropping your names in there. If you happen to know your Indigenous territory, that's bonus marks as well. And Wanjin from Catholic Community Services in New York Region. Awesome. Nice to meet you. And Destiny, thank you for spelling that out for us. The Coalition of Hamilton Indigenous Leadership. Excellent. Amazing. Yeah, we don't always know the acronyms in different parts of the country, but I really appreciate your guys' patience on that. Cool. Okay, well, we're going to get started, and I will forewarn, this is not our usual type of webinar. We always try different types of content for all of you to kind of share as much as we are learning as well along our path. But this one is around data and systems change utilizing ontologies. And if you don't know what an ontology is, you will by the end of this. And if you ever want to show off your data skills, this is going to be some good content. But more importantly than showing off to colleagues and friends is actually using the data for advancing your work. So hopefully this is going to give you some more in-depth understanding of how to structure data as you collect it and then analyze it and in assessing your impact. So again, the value of these webinars is you guys actually letting us know if these are of use. So by all means, we're trying something different on this one, something more technical. So hopefully it doesn't kind of scare you off, but would love your feedback after this to say, hey, was this useful or too nerdy? And my job is to get you excited about ontologies. All right, but we will get started. And land acknowledgement, as we always begin these public sessions, acknowledgement of the territory that I'm joining you from is Mohkinstsis in Calgary, Alberta, so Treaty 7. And as always, a plug for my buddy Michael Fatt. And if anybody's interested in purchasing Indigenous art, he's a Dene artist, lives up in Yellowknife, and literally, if you are interested, call me. I'll put my email up there. I'll hook you up with him. And so obviously the reason for all of this work and the examples that I'm going to use today are coming to you from some Indigenous organization work that we've been doing recently. And we always try to bring some of this lens into the work. Even though we're a technology company, we are obviously just the same as everybody else, committed to reconciliation action. And while software might not be the most obvious place you should expect reconciliation in, I would challenge all software providers and data providers to think about reconciliation in their work and what calls to action they can include in how they build software and the types of data we collect, and encourage others to collect and analyze. So with that, we will get into it. A quick 101 if nobody knows us, and if you're new to our webinars. Help Seeker is a social enterprise, a Canadian social enterprise, and our focus is on bringing some of the more advanced data technology solutions to support the social sector in resolving complex social issues. And our role in the ecosystem is to help with this technological foundation for hopefully a better social safety net. I'm already very, very hopeful in what I'm seeing through our work. So I'm excited to be part of your journeys. Compass platform is some of the pieces I'm going to be referencing today. If folks are not familiar with that, this is our flagship platform that includes 3 main products, and all of these are built on the ontology work I'm going to present on today. Not all products have embedded ontology frameworks, and these ones do. So Navigi is one that connects help seekers to support. So these are folks that are looking for support, or they're in formal support, and they need to have access to a product that can help navigate them through the complex ecosystem. They're oftentimes tailored to a specific organization. So just most recently, Jewish organizations in Toronto, for instance, wanting to map the ecosystem from the perspective of people that have that ancestry or ethnic affiliation. So they perceive the world in a unique way. So wanting to have the Navigi product tailored to that. Moretto is another one I'm going to be referencing today. That one is meant to connect people that are working in the system. So all of us, that might be social service providers, you might be a health service provider, you might even be on the justice, on the correction side, and you're working on a common case. And so the ability to work on and have a 360 on that particular client or service participant with the service participant's permission. So whether you're sharing information and collecting information within the organization, or whether you're doing that across organizations, Moretto is the product that does that. And then Cardo, which is again another one I'll be referencing, so just giving you the primer, is where we take all of the data that's coming through various resources in the community and the interactions that clients have with those resources, but also public data sets. So census obviously is a huge one we use, but things like the CRA data sets, Canada Revenue Agency, or crime data about a community, or where particular 311 calls are coming in from, and layering all of that with the client level information to say what's happening in this community, where are the needs, where are the gaps, where do we need to go to kind of amp up our collective impact. So that's Cardo. That's much more around data analytics and insights. But all of them obviously work together, and that's why we built them as a kind of as a suite. So they work together, but they also work on their own. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the context to why we're talking about something as complex as an ontology. And an ontology is, just in basic terms, is a way of mapping your knowledge, right? So imagine a giant knowledge map, or mind map, if you will, that is really specific to your domain. And in the social sector, we have our own mind maps as a collective, and then we have some really specific domain knowledge within our own organizations and in our own programs and in our own way of working as well. So an ontology is really important to unify us all as a social impact sector. And it's something that's been very much missing, unfortunately. And it's part of why we haven't really been able to talk the same language across programs or systems. Why, you collect data this way about gender and I collected this way about gender, and then we can't figure out a way to connect the dots because the data just doesn't mesh. So an ontology is a way of helping us get there. And as I go through this presentation, hopefully you'll see that it's both critical to systems change, but it's also drilled into the way you collect data on a day-to-day basis and how you understand your theory of change within the organizations, and as simple as how your case managers think about activities and outcomes is really important. So it's a precursor to really getting all of our data to work for us as an ecosystem. But oh, cool. Thanks for that thumbs up. I hope it makes sense. Perfect. Yes, thank you. And if things don't make sense, like do a thumbs down and then I'll try to explain it again. And in the biggest term, I think of all of the elements of our ecosystem, things like programs, like organizations, like funding sources, like clients. And those are entities in the ecosystem, if you will. And of course, they're all connected. So those connections need to be mapped at some point. And so systems mapping, in a nutshell, is a way of getting this knowledge out of our heads and onto paper. And ultimately gets us to that holistic approach, and not just holistic from a micro perspective, but also kind of systems perspective. So let's get into some down and dirty definition. So ontology, briefly put, it's a formal representation of knowledge within a domain, providing a common vocabulary and specifying meaning and relationships. You get nothing else out of that about an ontology. That's in a nutshell what it is. Why is it important? What's the purpose? So they allow us to communicate with each other. And at that very, very nitty-gritty level, if you don't have that, there's no way you're ever going to be able to do a really solid data integration effort. And data integration, don't think of that as a big government project where we need to have data integration, because our systems aren't talking to each other. Absolutely, you need an ontology for that. But even at a very basic level of understanding what your funder means and what your frontline staff mean, if you're not sharing a common vocabulary, then it's gonna, you're gonna have misfires as well. So that's the idea here, is that we have a shared understanding of concepts, of properties, of relationships, properties, aka things like characteristics. We'll get into the specifics more. And that's the purpose of it. It helps us interact. It helps you interact with your service participants. It helps you interact with your colleagues across organizations, and it helps organizations actually align around common purpose and objectives. Key aspects, they consist of a bunch of mini terms that we need to understand as well. I'm going to focus on a couple that are going to be really important, so that, and they're important because you'll see in a second, because as soon as you understand this, it's like seeing the Matrix. If anybody has seen the movie The Matrix, and when Neo starts to kind of see the patterns in the fabric of the Matrix, if you understand ontologies and you can't get out of your head, and if you keep going back to this, you're going to understand the world in this manner, and you're going to be you're just going to have a very, very different perspective on how you understand the world, and then how the world is expressed in data as well. And then you're going to start to see mistakes in how people don't understand ontologies, and you're going to be really annoying to your colleagues, but keep that under wraps for now. So ontologies have a couple of key concepts: classes, properties, relationships, instances, and axioms. And that helps us understand how to construct these really complex knowledge structures. But don't worry, I didn't define them, because I'm going to give you examples shortly. But let me check on my Q&A. Oh, yes, of course, we'll be sharing the presentation of the webinar. Nova, absolutely. You betcha. You betcha. In fact, I could probably even share the link as we speak. Okay, one thing that a lot of people get really mixed up on is they'll say, well, isn't an ontology a taxonomy? And everybody remembers science class where we did the Linnaean taxonomy of genus and species and subspecies and all of that. So that's a taxonomy. That's great. So a taxonomy is much more hierarchical. You can have many taxonomies that can feed off of the same ontology, but ontology is very different than a taxonomy. So and the best way to think about it is like one's kind of a network and the other one is a hierarchy. So one's about relationships, the other one is about kind of this more like kind of breakdowns of terms within each other. So I'll give you an example. So ontology. Okay, taxonomy is a hierarchy or classification based on common characteristics, providing a simple structure for organizing information. An ontology, on the other hand, is these semantic relationships, so meaning, properties, axioms for comprehensive knowledge representation, has much more flexibility in expressiveness compared to the taxonomy. And the best example I'll give you from our world that most people will be familiar with is the Ayres taxonomy, for instance, that tries to classify different services to say, oh, this service is a type of counseling, for instance, and within counseling there's DBT counseling, and within DBT counseling there's this counseling. So that's a hierarchical kind of taxonomy. You can have so many of these, but if you've ever tried to reconcile the Ayres taxonomy with your own taxonomy in your own organization, you'll see like it just doesn't fit, and that's because you need an ontology to connect the dots, to make meaning out of these different taxonomies. The other way of thinking about an ontology that I have found useful is the Rosetta Stone. And the Rosetta Stone, if you guys remember, was an archaeological discovery in Egypt that, or I'm not sure if it was in Egypt, but the big thing is in the ancient languages, aka the taxonomies of the past, we didn't have a way to translate them between different languages. So we had these languages that we were never able to translate. It wasn't until we found the Rosetta Stone that actually had, you know, this in this language means this in this language, and then means this in that language. So we were able to kind of understand that the concepts and their relationships to a common core concept. So a person is this in this language, you know, versus that in this language. So the ontology is this Rosetta Stone that helps us look at that holistically. Hopefully that's a little bit clearer, but yes, keep that in mind. What's an ontology? What's a taxonomy? Building an advanced data ontology is a pretty onerous task. You have to define key concepts, you have to define the sub-concepts within that, and you have to connect the dots, right? So you have to think of it as a network map. I'll show you some examples. So for instance, classes. So the nodes in the network might be a client, might be a service, might be a program, and then you need to connect. So what's the relationship between a client and a program, right? What's the relationship between a client and a service? What about a service and an outcome? So actually mapping this stuff out. At the same time, I also don't want to make it seem like it's something that you can't start within your own world. So the good news is as part of this big R&D effort that we did to build the Compass platform, we actually partner with University of Toronto computer science team, and they are ontologists. Like this is all these people do. Mark Fox, Bart, Daniela, these, if you've come across U of T's kind of work on ontology. So they actually partner with us, and we created a common ontology for the social sector. It was the first one ever done, the only one ever done, and it's free, it's open source, it's ready to use if you're actually looking for something like this. At the same time, it's like really hard to kind of wrap our heads. And I've been at this for, my goodness, like 4 years working on ontologies. And, I'm still learning every single day. So this is a primer to get you excited about it. But it's really not until you see the application of it that it becomes really powerful. So, but if you are interested in that, we will absolutely share with you the papers, the GitHub code, and all of that as well, if you're into that space. So the value of it, of course, it enables you to have that holistic view and creates that alignment across our sectors. It allows you to integrate data across organizations and sectors, and it allows you to have cross-sector initiatives because you have a common language. So key concepts. I promised I would explain this to you guys. Class. So this would be a broad category that defines a type of entity. So for instance, a person. So again, think of a dot in a network as a person. Within a person, you can have a program participant. So that's a type of person that can be a subclass of a person. So that's just a more specific way of defining it. Okay. The other one is properties. So relationships or associations between classes. You have a person and you have a program, you have a funder. So what is the relationship between the program and the funder? So funded by would be the property in that instance. Simple, right? Fields and attributes. So these would be AKA characteristics. So there are values that are assigned to fields of particular instances of a class. So for instance, Jane Doe. All right, so characteristics and fields, so the actual specific data. So for a person class, things like first name, last name, date of birth. So you can start to see now how an ontology, big concept like person or program participant, you can see how knowing that that's an entity within your network of knowledge, how that is related to what we collect on the day-to-day basis. So first name, last name, date of birth, right? So understanding that the date of birth is a kind of a property. So the person has a date of birth, right? That becomes a really interesting way of looking at how data is connected to each other. Again, I'll show you guys more examples as we go. The value of understanding how all of this stuff gets mapped out is if you don't understand it, then your ability to articulate with data the level of how your micro activities, how the things you're doing between the organization, the program, the service, and how that relates to the client need, and how your service satisfies that need at that micro level. There's no way to demonstrate that at a meso level, so at the program and organization level, to then layer that and make an argument through a data-driven perspective that you're making that impact at a macro level. So that oftentimes, we do things like input, output, the logic model approach, and we kind of map that out. And those are ways of getting going on mapping the knowledge. But what we often don't do is translate that into the way we collect the data and analyze the data. And that's why the ontology piece is so critical within our own organizations. And that's why it becomes even more critical if you're working across organizations, if you're a systems funder, or if you're part of a collaborative working on a common issue. That's where things fall apart. They're connecting the dots between these levels. And if you're familiar with systems change, this is coming straight out of systems change. Complexity science literature that talks about how we need to layer in these levels of understanding in our efforts. All right. Okay. So life cycle of data with intent. One tip I have for you guys is thinking about data ontology before, or ideally before you start collecting data. Ideally, you have this ontology mapped out with the data that you're collecting before you go in and start collecting data. And the reason for it is quite telling. So sometimes I'll see in data that comes to us, the help seeker often gets called in when people don't can't make sense of their data, if that's ever happened to you. So they've been collecting data for years and years and years, and they'll hand it over. And when I look at the data, it often confuses the ontology concepts with each other. So it'll have a property or a characteristics of a client, for instance, and they'll call that a program output, right? So they'll misclassify because they never did this kind of logic together. The other times that they'll confuse subclasses. So they'll have, for instance, indigeneity as in the wrong kind of bucket. So it's not a characteristic of a client, but it's an outcome sometimes. And maybe sometimes that's the case, but things like that are really really easy to fix if you have this type of approach. So a really structured way of doing your data collection is really key, and having that documented and having that consistency and training your staff on it is really key. Just going to check our questions in here. What's the outcome of what's the outcome of the Compass project? It's all of this stuff and the implementation of the Compass platform in different organizations. So that's in different aspects of the Compass project are throughout Canada. So lots. The big outcome though is creating the creation of the platform that I mentioned before. And then long-term outcomes are you guys adopting the platform and using the data to make change. That's the long-term outcome. Do large language, Ty McKinney says, do large language models do a better job understanding concepts using? Yes, that's a really great question, Ty. There is some emergent literature now on essentially feeding your ontology into a large language model as kind of part of its tuning, and doing that so that it interprets and provides more contextual answers. So yeah, absolutely, and that's exactly what we do in our training as well. Is we embed the ontology in different parts of the data lifecycle. So at data collection, and I'll show you that in a second, but also in the tuning of the large language models that we use in Cardo, for instance, so that it's smarter. But I would also say having your taxonomy in play as well, documented as well, is really critical, as well as your basics like data dictionaries, right? So that it can understand that, especially if you're tuning your LLM to not hallucinate, to have more groundedness is the kind of the technical term, so that it doesn't invent data. So there's a whole piece that a different webinar that we did not that long ago that Matt, actually our EVP in charge of technology and AI, presented on how he's been training our LLMs to actually do exactly that, to understand domain-specific taxonomies, domain-specific ontology concepts, but also stick to the data. So feeding data that without obviously going outside of our own kind of box, because you can't feed ChatGPT, for instance, some of this stuff, specifically private data. So hopefully that answered that. So yeah, it gives you a huge advantage, though, Ty, if you're looking at that. All right. Okay. So one or two, couple of tidbits here around the importance of stakeholder involvement. The value of doing an ontology in your organization is that, and again, think of it as a giant mind map to start with, is to actually get the knowledge out of your people's heads. So stakeholder involvement is really critical. And I would also say, when we built the Compass ontology, we built it with about, oh my gosh, I think the brains of like 1,500 people. And so it really was a collective effort. The digital supercluster, like I mentioned before, gave us a huge advantage in funding R&D, right? Research and development. So Compass research and development was 2 years of getting concepts out of people's heads and defining them and building all of that knowledge and making that available. But you're welcome to do that type of approach within your organization at a smaller scale, of course, and using what we've already built. Like I said, this stuff's ready to rock, and I'll present it to you guys in a sec. Feedback loops. One thing we've learned is that just because you built it 2 years ago doesn't mean you should just sit on those laurels. You should always be extending the ontology, is what it's called. So creating, adding detail to it over time, understanding new types of relationships over time, and using it as a way of having discussions, right? So we're oftentimes in our organization arguing about, ontology concepts. Is this the characteristic of a stakeholder? No, no, it's not, or that's an completely, you're miscategorizing that, right? So maybe it doesn't have to be that kind of data focus, but for you it might be something more around, is that an outcome of our program, or is that an activity that the client is doing for themselves, right? So understanding kind of where this fits within your practice is also important, because it can really add value, and that's a way for your case management teams to really get bought into the data collection as well, because they're understanding what it is you're asking for, and because they've also had a chance in shaping it as well. So with that being said, I will move to show you guys a little bit about what I mean by this. So I will move to my handy Miro board. Because like I said, I wanted to show you something that is easy to replicate for you. And Miro is a great mind mapping. You might have your own mind mapping stuff as well. So here's in a nutshell what this stuff looks like. It's a giant spreadsheet of various concepts that, now this took us, like I said, years to map out. There's a lot more to it as well. Like I'm not showing you the code, like the GitHub repository and all of that. I think that's probably going to be too much for a 101 on ontologies, but I will walk you through a couple of things and how this stuff works, and I'll focus in on something more tangible, such as the kind of the stakeholder and person, organization, and such. So I'll start simply with saying, like, so a person, for instance, is, everybody knows what a person is. But within a person, you can have a service participant, for instance, would be a type of person. And that service participant is showing up in an organization and likely has a need, right? So a need might be a housing need or a medical need, or what they might present with. They might have a problem. They have a problem, getting rent paid, for instance. They might have another aspect here, a goal. They might want to get housed, for instance, get housing that's affordable. They might have a housing status, for instance, homeless. That would be a type of status. State, they might be in a state of psychosis, for instance. So, and now that doesn't have to be as extreme, but state of hunger, right? Or they could be a state of kind of satisfaction. They're happy. They might also have things like an acuity score. So these are things that are associated, concepts that are associated with the service participant class, right? So this is a class. The other one is, how do we connect that to a service? So how do we represent in our knowledge what a service is, and how does that fit with an organization and a program? So I'll take you up to the concept of an organization. So something like this would have, everybody knows what an organization is. Nonprofit is a type of organization, for instance. They have characteristics themselves. So they might have, that actually being a nonprofit is a characteristic. They might have an address. they might have, well, they should have an impact model. They also have programs, right? So an organization has a program. Why is it important to know that? Because when you actually build your data collection, you need to know, am I collecting the data at a program level? And how do I ensure that I can roll up my program data at the organization level? If you don't map the stuff out and your data architecture doesn't allow for that, then you're going to have the problem I often see, which is how data is collected at the program level, but nobody can actually tell you how many beneficiary stakeholders, aka clients, are in the organization as a whole, right? So that is where this stuff becomes really critical in building your data architecture too. So a program has a service. A program is a collection of activities, services, types of focus areas, etc. But importantly, programs often have services. So a service, let's say housing first programs, just because I was talking about housing, a housing service might be landlord relations. Another one might be case management service. Another one might be, again, counseling, mental health support, referral, navigation service. And so the program mapping what services are within that program is critical. Why? Because the service, in theory, and this is really key, and this is really kind of big concept that took me years to figure out. Hopefully I explain it well, but the service satisfies or creates a satisfier, does something, and that needs to match the service participants need. And I can't tell you how many times I've been in situations where service providers or program can't articulate how the service matches the need of the client, and like what is it that the service does within that program context that actually satisfies that need. And this relationship is probably the most important relationship in our entire micro, meso, macro systems change process, because it's only when that connection happens, when there's a match, that we create the conditions for that need to be satisfied. Therefore, for the service participant to be able to kind of change their state, right? So that need satisfier might be something like rent subsidy. So the service is providing financial assistance, and the satisfier is the actual financial, the money, the actual cash, right? The cash is the need satisfier, and when that need satisfier is produced by an activity. So the activity might be the staff has a meeting with the client. That's the activity. That activity produces this need satisfier, and then now that need is satisfied. And you have to collect this. If you don't collect this, and somebody says, well, are we meeting client needs? And then I look at the data and I was like, well, how do I see this relationship? And if that relationship's not in the data, you can't really know, right? You're making inferences. You're guessing. You're guessing that the program and all of their activities, and you see this a lot, activities are happening. There's education workshops, there's client meetings, there's this. But if this stuff isn't articulated, and if the case manager or the person doing the activity with the client are not articulating this in the practice, the match doesn't happen, right? And that magic doesn't beget a change in the service participant state, right? So the state, right? The state of the client is enabled by this activity. So they again, let's go back to homelessness. So we've got a state of enabled by the activity. So the client was homeless, and now they get the need satisfier met through the activity, and now it causes them to be housed, right? Simple as that. It could also be, though, that there's client events that are happening that are are also causing additional complications. So this is where we can start to get a little bit more interesting in terms of the complexity of systems change. And this is, again, needs to be captured. If you don't capture it, we can't explain it. But and this often happens where folks say like, no, my clients are really complex. It's not that simple. And they're right. They're absolutely right. Stuff happens. Events happen. Sometimes those events are great, like an activity, like getting housed, but events can also be not that great. So it can be a negative event. It could be a medical event that is perceived to be a negative to the client. It could be a substance use event that is not getting into treatment. It's actually getting having an overdose, for instance. Those medical events again influence the state of the client, and so the activity impact may no longer satisfy that need. So the same time that providing somebody with a financial assistance might have actually made that connection between the service and the need for the client, that need satisfier got met. In other cases, it might not. So it's really important to understand in relation to the client characteristics. So does the client have previous, long list of trauma, blowing out of housing, complexity, right? The more complexity of events that are negative, that influence the state of them when they come into the program or during their time in the program, the activities that are needed and the impact of those activities in terms of meeting the needs are going to differ. And it's important to collect the data that way so that we can, when you ask your analyst to say, well, how can I right match my activities, my duration of my activities, the types of activities I'm doing, the types of services I'm providing, how do I make that match? If you don't collect the data this way, we really can't tell you. We really can't. We can guess at it, we can infer, but what I'm seeing out there mostly is this data is not collected like this. So it's really, really difficult to kind of put it together. And it gets really complicated when we have to answer the question of, well, what's the outcome? What's the outcome of your program? And can you show me that you did that? It was your activity, program X, that made that change in that person. And of course, we'll say to them, hey, it's the whole ecosystem, y'all. It's not just me. But you still have an accountability to show that you've done the mapping to know how your day-to-day activities should layer into that outcome. So this is kind of where this stuff comes in. And we always talk about output, outcome, but we've never explained to the world how the magic happens. And the magic happens down here, right? It's in this layer of concepts. And we have to collect that. It's otherwise we can't stand up and say with a straight face either. And I've been in those conversations where it's like, man, I think we're doing the right thing. I think so, but it can't for sure prove it. And that kind of rots at your own confidence in what you're doing or in what you're funding, because you're not really able to follow the math, if you will. So I'm going to show you how to follow the math, because essentially this concept of a service and a program, obviously those things are related to outcomes as well. So an outcome, which let me just check the Q&A, make sure you guys are. Yes, Dula. Okay, so yeah, this one was done. Okay, Leah, can you give another example of the satisfier client need and service? Yes, sure. I'll do that before I move into outcomes, because it's really, really critical. So a need might be, I have mental health need. My need is I need support managing my anxiety. Okay, and this program provides. Oops, what did I do here? This program. Oh my gosh, I zoomed in too much. Okay, a program provides a counseling service. Cool. So counseling, in that case, the need satisfier in that case would be the session that the counselor, which is a stakeholder, and the counselor is the staff. The counselor provided kind of a therapeutic conversation or session, that satisfied, that made me feel better, right? Or gave me a skill I didn't have before. And that satisfied my mental health need in that instance. I hope that makes sense. I hope that's a better a better example than the housing one. I'll give you another one, and you just got to like keep going at it. It takes a long time to click. It's a really tough one. I also recommend like going to town on ChatGPT with these concepts and defining them as well. And I'll share some definitions and things like that for you guys. Another example would easy one. I'm hungry. My need is I have a food need, right? My program is a food pantry, and my service is providing hampers. The hamper that I ate satisfied my need. So that hamper is a need satisfier. Now the need satisfier is not satisfying the need until it connects to the service participant, until it's from the service participant's perspective. Yeah, keep that in mind too, that their needs satisfied. So at the end of that activity, if you guys recall, you know, when you go into a grocery store and they ask you at the counter, what did you find everything you needed? What they're trying to do, because they know this in the private sector too, they know that they're checking for this. Did we make this connection between my service and my activities and the outputs and all the stuff I did, and the event of our interaction? Did that produce a need satisfier for you to be like, yeah, yes, I did find everything I needed. Yes, sir. So why is that important? Because outcomes have to be are also from the perspective of the client, or they're client outcomes. They're not true outcomes, and unless your program doesn't really care about clients, which I don't think anybody would agree. If the service participant, you know, has the outcome, then they should agree. So if you're saying to them, you've met your housing outcome, okay? You've met your housing outcome because I did my activity, right? And they're saying, okay, but my need's still not satisfied, right? Because my need was not just satisfied by a housing unit. It was also I had another need. I had a need of community. I had a need of income, long-term income, or income stability. I had a bunch of needs, and this is again where people get all mixed up. Is they'll put a tick mark on what they feel their program outcome is, but they're not looking at things from the client perspective. So client service participants' needs are really complex and multifaceted. And so sometimes, dare I say, we don't satisfy the needs in our own programs. That's why we need our partners. That's why we need the rest of our ecosystem to do their components of this. And it's understanding the needs that are satisfied by your program and how they play in with the needs that are satisfied by other programs, maybe within your organization, but probably outside of your organization. That's why the ontology is so key, because if you guys are not looking at this as an ecosystem, then there's no way. You're never going to figure it out. You're never going to figure out if that service participant's collection of needs are actually being satisfied by what your ecosystem as a whole is offering that client. And if you can't show it in the data, you can't really prove it, you can't measure it, you can't do continuous improvement, and all this, you know, data collection is for naught, because you're not really answering the key question, which is, are our service participants getting their needs met? And the needs met are not just from our perspective as the system, we're the system, it's also from their perspective. And so that's the hopefully a little bit more detail on that. Let's check the Q&A. George is asking, would you use ontologies support evaluation of a collaborative and integrated service delivery approach between orgs working in a partnership contemplated under the information sharing framework at both micro and macro level. That's bang on, George. Ontology is awesome within your own program, but it has like transformative impact if you use this across organization. And what George is referring to, and I'll that's another really great information resource. George had built a privacy sharing framework. We use it all the time in all of our work to enable data sharing so that we can actually map this data at the client level at an ecosystem. So when I said Moretto, that one part of Compass that allows you to track all this stuff and then roll it up at the org level so that we can actually trace the client and who's working on that client and which staff in which organization is satisfying that client's needs. That's exactly right. And you have to have the privacy framework in place to allow for it. Truly not a kind of a game changer. Everybody knows that. And there's lots of great privacy resources to enable you to do this if you guys are ever thinking about kind of taking things to the next level. So let's see what else I was going to show you guys. I got all of 10 minutes, so I will kind of jump back into my deck here because I did want to chat a little bit about further around why this stuff is critical in impact analysis and reporting. And appreciate you guys just dropping the questions as we go in. But I mean, hopefully you can see just from looking at that ontology framework, how this stuff is so critical in impact measurement as well, and ontological reasoning, generating those insights and reporting, the magic that you can do with having your data collection set up this way is so cool because you can actually look at things across systems and you can actually share data about the client. So I'll, I will spend 2 seconds showing you guys another interesting example. And this is just about how to actually translate these concepts into data collection. So I'm going to log into our data collection platform. Okay, yes. And I'll go into my live boards. Okay, so these are some of the kind of organizations that are on our system. And I just want to show you something as simple as the client list. So the client list, and yeah, this is fake data, don't worry. This is Kelowna Friendship Society, just kind of a playboard for, and we're working through the ontology. So one of the things that we did right away is we basically looked at the various reports that their funders required. So you can see in here, kind of things, submission dates, number of people staying overnight, these are all kind of indicators, if you will, that this program has. So we know that at a basic level, there's certain things we need to collect. So, things like self-identification, things like a number of kids, reasons for referral, all of that. But the trick is, how do you actually structure this thing so that you can generate the data and the form? So how do I collect the right form? Well, you need to start with the data first. Make sure the data allows for you to do that. So we actually build all this stuff using the ontology. So then we understand that this is all about the client, and this is all about their characteristics, right? So the client, Kim Kardashian, and she's got a daughter, and they have a preferred name. They have household rules. They have preferred pronouns. They, them. They have, in some cases, I mean, Northwest won't have or North won't have a driver's license, but she could. They have Indigenous affiliation, referral sources, etc. And so now we can understand that, for instance, there's a referral source, and that referral source is it's a contributing stakeholder, right? We know that. So that's mapped out. And that contributing stakeholder also has characteristics. They have a last name, etc. We've got additional insights like, emergency contact, current health clinic, all that type of stuff. So the first thing we did is actually build out, like, what are the two main things that we need to understand? Well, we need to make sure that their funders are happy. So let's replicate exactly what their stats need to look like. So then they can just essentially download this and ship it. But more importantly, let's figure out, like, what does the program need operationally? Now, the next thing that we need to do is look at the activities, right? So now I build my activities folder, right? So you can start to see the service events, right? We're going to be able to start to build out. Another folder, again, ontology concept, might be outcomes as well, right? Another one might be, I'm trying to figure out, maybe my referring, or my partners, referral partners. And so this is how you start to build this stuff within your own organization and to make sure the data is collected properly. But you might say to me, well, who cares? Because that's just one organization. So I'll show you another one. Let's see here in our last 2 minutes. But just to show you what it looks like when it actually is in a context of sharing. So this is Winnipeg, and in Winnipeg there's different shelters, and they have very diverse organizations. So this is Siloam, and Siloam is a massive organization in Winnipeg. They have clothing, showers, computers, bed management, etc. And for them, they're going to be sharing this information across their bed management, case management, housing, and other services. And they're going to share that across organizations in terms of their referrals. You can see all this is fake data, so I have no problem kind of sharing the stuff with you guys. But the idea here is that we can collect some of this data and also enable the sharing of it between organizations and track some of this stuff over time as well. So this is an example of how this looks, but what you have to remember in this is, like, what's behind this is the ontology, right? What's behind it is much more than just collecting the data, that you need to actually do this, right? So you can see here the staff member, right? Let's assign this to Dean, the community member, Bugs Bunny. So the staff, the client, what's the client's goal, right? Child welfare. We can create whatever goal we want. The event, when did that event happen? When does that event have to end, or did it end? What's the name and the goal of that? So then we can actually then, basically look at the cases, right? And now we're able to analyze this. And this looks familiar because we can just simply export this to a CSV and then do our analysis on it in Carto, for instance, or you can do the analysis wherever you please. But that's how it works in practice. So I guess we'll kind of wrap it up with I of course got really really engaged in this stuff and didn't finish all of it, but I did hopefully give you a sense of how this stuff looks otherwise, and get you excited about it. I think we might need to do a second one to give you all of it. But as a takeaway, cross-sector communication, systems change, and that refinement is going to be key. Next one is going to be a way less technical, much more practical. So please do sign up for this one. It's really about how you get your lived experience and frontline staff in shaping the data collection system so that they're really benefiting from it. And it's so cool, you guys, to get service participants to tell you what you should be collecting and how you should be collecting, and even what the technology should look like. I don't know if you guys are using kind of what you're using for technology. We're going to unfortunately have to do product placement because we use Moretto, our own software, to do that. But just to show you how lived experience, how they want to experience data collection is what I'm really, really excited to do. And same from a frontline perspective too. What does frontline look like? And so it's really interesting because, you know, it's all about the client, right? If the client doesn't agree with you, then you're, you know, you probably should question whether you might want to change things up a little bit. So yeah, highly encourage you guys to come to that one. Like I said, we'll use examples from our own practice, but we're going to make sure that they're insightful for all of you in your work. So yeah, July 18, 10 a.m. MST, and who should attend? Hopefully you identify as one of those: provider, analyst, policymaker, and profit leader. So yeah, with that being said, I will see you on the next one. Thanks, everybody. Oh, yes. ARDA says UN uses global level ecosystem. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, ARDA. Thanks. Bye, y'all.